Hey and welcome back. In today's video we are going to create a classic UFO from scratch. Inside Houdini and of course fully procedural. But before we dive into modeling our UFO, let's outline the plan. We'll start with a simple disc as the base of our flying saucer. From there we will separate the middle section to form the cockpit, while the outer section will get some irregularities to make it more interesting. Next we will extrude the outer ring to create the classic saucer shape. After that we will take the inner ring and extrude it upward into a nice dome for the cockpit. Once that's in place, we look for a smart way to cut out window sections, dividing them into frames and glass panels. Finally, we will add a small antenna on top, along with a few extra details around the outer edge. Alright, let's jump into Houdini and start building this step by step with nodes. Alright, now that we're in Houdini, let's start by dropping a geo container and we call this UFO. Dive inside and I want to start with our base shape, the disc for our flying saucer. I will use a line for this, drop it down, putting it into the Z axis so it lays flush on the ground, and I give it a bit more length, and in the next step I want to revolve it. What this does is basically wrapping this line around the y-axis and forming this disc. Don't need UVs for now, and the nice thing is after I cranked up our divisions here to make it a bit more round, I can come back to the line and for example crank up the subdivisions in here. Let's go maybe for 6 for now. Let's append a fuse just to be sure, kind of security measure, to drop this fuse node in here. And now I want to group this disc and especially the inner area. So I will not go for the base group, but I will go for the bounding regions, and I want a sphere because this is round and I want to do this ring selection. So let's crank this up with the middle mouse here to get our little ladder, and 2.5 should do the trick. So I want to have 2 sections of the outer ring left and the inside part. Let's call this inner part, and we can append a group invert and take this inner part, which is then being inverted, and we call it outer part. Okay, after this is done I can use a split and I choose our outer part to split the geometry. I can attach 2 null objects, one stream. This will be our outer part and this will be our inner part. Perfect. Let's work on our disc for now. As I described it in my sketching session, I want to subdivide it more unevenly so we get rid of this repetition here, and that makes the entire shape look more interesting in the end. So I want to use a Voronoi Fracture for this. Usually this is used, for example, in RBD simulations when you fracture an object and then it's going to be destroyed into pieces. But we can leverage its functionality and use this for our purposes. So let's say I create another circle. Polygons is fine, like this. I'm going to lay it on the ground floor again. We crank up the subdivisions and I will convert this to a line like this. So we are really just left with the circle element in here. You can see where it's laying currently, and what I want to do next is I want to scatter some points because these points are way too many and way too evenly distributed. So let's lower this to maybe 11. I like a good uneven number. Can also play with the seed in here, and I don't know, this looks quite good. and we can lower the relax iterations maybe to 3. So these things are not spaced so evenly again. That's the entire purpose of this thing. And now we're going to wire it into our Voronoi Fracture, highlight it, and we see it doesn't look good. What we can do in here is we don't need an inner group and an exterior group. Our Voronoi Fracture is basically built to shatter a volume into pieces. So it will always create an outer surface and an inner surface. So let's uncheck the create inner surfaces. So we are just left with one part of this Voronoi output. The prefix, I like to use the word name. And once we append a color node, we can see actually what it did. Because with all the other lines, it's a bit hard to see. So in the color node, I can go into random from attribute. In the attribute, I want to pick name. And of course, it's a primitive attribute. Cool. Now you see, we divided this ring into like uneven sections. We have a lot of smaller ones down here and some of the big elements. And overall, I think it gives this shape way more interest. Cool. So after this, we can poly extrude our shape to give it a little thickness. Of course, we want to output the back faces. Otherwise, as you can see, each of our sections will be empty. And while we are here, let's name everything accordingly. And like this, it makes it easier down the line to find these things and address them accordingly. So now I want to select the 2 inner points here to scale them up to really shape our flying saucer a bit more and give it this iconic roundish outer ring. For this, I want to use another group. And like I said, I want to select some points in here. I also want to select by bounding region, and you can see some of those elements, they require it to be points. So thank God we selected it. So we can choose the bounding object. And for our bounding object, I want to build this real quick. I will get this null object, I will copy it and object merge it down here. In that way, I don't need to draw like super long lines here, and I can basically import geometry where I need it in my node tree. Okay, but I'm not finished building it. I want to give it a lapse thicken in both directions, 0.5 to make it a bit bigger. And before I append a transform node in here and scale this up by 1.5 maybe. And that way it's big enough to cover our points of the object, but it won't be too big to include all the points. So once we wire it in here and we highlight the node, you can see I selected both of those point rings here. Perfect. So let's call this inner points. And I will append a match size because we forgot to put this entire ring back to the center. Right now the bottom lays at Y0, but I want it to be in the middle. So with the match size, I append it and now it's in the center again. Let's append a soft transform like this. And in here we will reference our inner points and scale it up by, let's say, 4. And you see my outside was also growing. I don't want that. So I will shrink this kind of influence, the soft radius, by a good chunk because I don't want it to be too fat. And I defined my height up here. Let's color those nodes blue, where we can change the look of our little UFO. And after, I want to work on those side faces here. Unfortunately, our side group that we defined up here won't work for that because it will also include those big ones in the middle and each side panel of each and every section of this ring. So we need to come up with a new way to group those outer faces, and a good way can be the height. So we can select our bounding box again and we scale it up, and we know that our height is 0.2, so I can put it in here. But right now they're exactly the same height and it's not enough for the bounding box to include those faces. So let's give it a little bit more height. Yeah, like this is doing the trick. And now we just have this kind of faces selected that we want to work with. So let's give this our new side group. Now I want to poly extrude these guys. So let's select the side in here and give it a 0.1 maybe, like this. Yeah, that's quite cool. But to shape it even more, we can go into the transform extruded front and maybe scale it down just a touch to get a little bit this kind of flowing line in here, that it's not like a hard angle in here, so it's more or less tapering into this shape down here. It's still a bit hard, so let's try to add another section here. So we do another poly. I can actually copy the one we already have. So we're working again on the extruded faces like this, and maybe this time I want to do half the way and shrink it even more. So yeah, I think that looks fine. So now to define each and every ring section a bit from the other ones they connect to, I want to bevel all of those edges in order to give some little indents in here to make it look nicer in the rendering and give a bit more definition. It's all about the details at the end of the day. But you can clearly skip this step. But we will set up 2 nodes that we will copy over a lot during the system. So let's group these things and let's call this group already bevel. This time I want to work on edges and I want to include by edges being checked. And for that I want to select minimum edge angle and the maximum edge angle. Usually I would select these 2 sections, so 89 and 91, so we have like every edge where is like a 90-degree change in the surface detected. So from this surface to this one will be 90 degrees, from this to this is 90 degrees, and we are just missing some of those ones here where I think the math ain't mathing, so we just lower one side a bit and we up the other one a bit. And now we see, maybe I can even turn on the wireframe, that we selected each and every cross section. Yeah, that looks quite good. Just not here in the outside. So I lower it again. Like this. And now we should have all the edges selected that we need. Back to the smooth shaded, and we append a poly bevel. I saved before, so Houdini really likes to crash sometimes with this node. And in here we select the bevel and put a 0.01 maybe. Yeah, like this. Maybe crank up the divisions even a little bit to have a bit more to work with. Perfect, cool. So let's work on our top surfaces and bottom surfaces. I would like to give each of those elements another extrusion level to, yeah, again, add more detail to it. We can already color these 2 maybe green because we are going to use the bevel node way more. And let's come up with a way to just end up with the top facing elements and with the bottom facing ones. Remember, up here we already defined our top and bottom group, and I can use them down here again. And let's say we put a group combine, and in this group combine I want to work on primitives, and my is top, and it equals the top group, you can see. But I don't want to have it all these faces in here that resulted from the beveling action we did above. So inside the poly bevel, I think I can add this and this group. And in here, in my group combine, I can now say subtract this kind of weird polyfillets that we just selected. And we have these little things, and I think the subtraction of those point fillets, yeah, is getting rid of those. And now our top group references the right faces again. Let's do the same real quick for our bottom. Like this, perfect. And we're good to go. Let's have a look how this entire thing looks a bit more subdivided. Let's append a subdivision sub in here. Let's get rid of the points. And I think it has already a nice flow of shape here. And enough detail down here to really keep this kind of edge here. Or this little bumper in case you fly into a asteroid or something like this. So yeah, it's nice. Let's append also a normal sub to make the shading proper. Like this. That's cool. And like I said, I now want to extrude just a tiny bit each of the top surfaces. I append a poly extrude again. It's very repetitive and we're dealing all the time with the same nodes. This is basically modeling in Houdini. Your tree is growing quite fast because you need to break down each and every modeling step into a separate node. Okay, let's select our top group and say 0.01. Yeah, just to have those kind of patchy elements up here that looks maybe more like a armor against those asteroids in case we are bumping into those. I need those surfaces later on, so I will call this detail surface, and we basically can do the same thing for the bottom. Could have extruded them in the same step, but these ones I won't need, so they are more just decorative. And detail surface top. And this is the bottom. This now basically concludes our ring shape. Let's put here our out ring. Out. To also have a look on like what we built here is bulletproofed. Can for example come into the scatter node and say now 11 elements, or like just 3 or 23. Future FIFO here, and I just noticed that when we extruded our sides of this element, I forgot to mention that we also here in the transform space need to put our transform axis to global. Before in both of them it was locally selected. That somehow messed up my structure, so set both to global, and once you come into your scatter sub, you can basically just scrub through and add as many segments as you want. And of course you can also change the global seed for have different kind of flying saucer outcomes. But once this set to local, it could look a bit weird. Okay, that wraps up our first part of the UFO modeling. In the next section we will tackle the cockpit and create more details for our flying saucer. See you there.